This reading is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda and is written by Swami Kriyananda. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it and your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. This passage is from the Bhagavad Gita, the 6th chapter. One who beholds my presence everywhere and all things dwelling equally in me, he never loses loving sight of me, nor I of him, through all eternity. That yogi finds security in me, who, though his days be rushed and action-filled, is anchored inwardly at rest in me, and worships me in every living form. That one, Arjuna, is the best of men, and truest he of yogis, whose heart feels the joys of all, their pains, their searing griefs, with equal care, as though they were his own. How beautifully reminiscent this passage is of the teachings of Jesus. We saw this teaching in the words, "Inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me." We find it also in that passage where a certain lawyer asked Jesus, "Master, what is the great commandment in the law?" And Jesus answered him, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." A precept common in all religions is the advice, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." This might be taken cynically as advice on how to get the best out of others. What is really meant, however, is that we should see ourselves in all, for the deep reason that, in spirit, we are already one with them. Krishna, in speaking of the yogi who sees God in everything, and everything in God, was referring to one who has actually attained God realization. Yet his teaching is important also for people on all levels of spiritual attainment. How many people bemoan God's absence from their lives, his seeming indifference to them during their misfortune, his apparently determined silence when they pray to him. Sri Krishna here reveals the secret for winning a divine response. Practice God's presence. Call to him not merely during hours of urgent need when you've exhausted your own resources. Share every thought with him, your lightest whims, your joys, your disappointments. People normally think, "I am acting, I am enjoying," or, when things go badly, "I am disappointed." The devotee should think rather, "Lord, we are acting together." Every joy, every disappointment that I feel is ours, not mine alone. Again, people normally think of God in the third person. Thus, if they want to include him in their actions, they will think, "He is acting with me." The devotee must school himself rather to think you, not he. He must talk to God as his dearest friend. He may even scold God sometimes, as he might, with love, his own nearest and dearest. He must strive to see in everything and in everyone the Lord's hidden presence. See all things in relation to infinity. Think of God as playing hide and seek with him, so to speak, within every tree, every stone, every human being. He should view every tree, stone, and human being as part of that infinite reality out of which all things have come, and in which the entire universe resides. It is with this consciousness that one should love his neighbor, not for his merely human qualities, but for the divine reality residing within him. One should love his neighbor for the fact that, in the greatness of God, he and his neighbor are one. By practicing God's presence in this way, one soon finds that conscious presence within him everywhere he goes. guiding him, protecting him, and filling him with bliss ineffable. In the Bible's Gospel of St. Matthew, we read of a king, capitalized K for the references to God, who welcomed certain devotees to the divine consciousness, saying, "I was an hungered, and you gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. Naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came unto me." The elect asked him when it was that they had served him in these ways, and the king answered, "Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me." To see God as residing in every human being, as indeed he does, is to open oneself to limitless opportunities for serving him. Paramhansa Yogananda, in Autobiography of a Yogi, described a saint who lived in this consciousness as, quote, "the greatest man of humility I ever knew." He described a seemingly chance encounter with this saint. "Another day found me walking alone near the Howrah railroad station. I stood for a moment by a temple, silently criticizing a small group of men with drum and cymbals who were violently reciting a chant. How undevotionally they used the Lord's divine name in mechanical repetition, I reflected. My gaze was astonished by the rapid approach of Master Mahashai. "Sir, how come you here?" The saint, ignoring my question, answered my thought. "Isn't it true, little sir, that the beloved's name sounds sweet from all lips, ignorant and wise?" He passed his arm around me affectionately. I found myself carried on his magic carpet to the merciful presence. If you would see God, watch for him everywhere. If you would hear his voice, listen for it in all sounds and also in their supporting silences. If you would know God, seek his wisdom behind merely human knowledge. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the expert cameraman who zoomed in. We can only do the camera for each other. I hope you got a glimpse of the Christmas tree. It's nice to call it the Christ consciousness tree, and represents our ascent to God in many ways. Today's reading brings up a lot of things in my mind, and you know, one of the things Swamiji is talking about in this reading is seeing God in everyone. And I think most of us are familiar with this thought and probably say, yes, that sounds like a great idea, and I would really like to do that. I don't know how, but theoretically, it sounds very good. And so I remember in one class I was talking about this, and someone said, "But I can't feel God in everyone because some people have hurt me so much." And, you know, there's a reality to that, but also there's something about how do we see God in others that can be helpful in all situations. Swamiji, well, yeah, I have a really good quote from him, but I'll say that a little later. One of the things he said to help us expand into a sense of seeing God in others is through kindness. And, you know, we try to talk a lot about kindness. And again, kindness can be a concept that people agree with. Yes, kindness is fine and good. In fact, especially good when kindness comes my way. and so I'll give you a little kindness too if you give me kindness first. That can often be something that can happen. Swamiji, instead, when he talks about kindness, he's really talking about kindness as a spiritual practice. And how is this? It's not kindness in the way where you just superficially compliment someone to gain their liking of you, to gain their approval of you. It's not that kind of a thing. It's not just being sweet, because one example Swamiji gives is if there's an alcoholic, one could say, well, if I'm a kind person, I'll give the alcoholic alcohol. But it's not actually kind to give alcohol to an alcoholic. And so you have to withdraw it and use what's called tough love, and not give that alcohol. But that can be perceived as unkind. But kindness takes into account everyone's reality. And when we have to do that, we are expanding our sense of self beyond the little I, beyond the little sense of me, mine, into a greater reality. And, you know, if you think about meditation, I think one of the hardest parts of meditation, well, meditation can be hard in general, but one difficult part is the expansion phase, to where, you know, meditation has different phases. There's the relaxation that's required. There's the interiorization that happens, especially through our techniques, and we talk about pratyahara, withdrawing the energy into the spine. And then after that can come the expansion stage, and that can feel a little elusive. Like, what is this expansive stage? How do I expand? You know, Master said, I have a really great quote from Master about that. He said, it is the greatest delusion to say, I am God, until you know within your own experience that you are God and can work with his miracles. When you can feel your consciousness in every atom, in all space, and beyond all creation, then you can say, I am God. Not until then. So, you know, in that case, he's really talking about a very expansive state. If you've ever read his poem, Samadhi, it describes such an expansive state, we can't even imagine it. And this expansive state is a necessary part of meditation. And what it does, it takes the focus off of, again, the ego, and expands the sense of self beyond just the flesh here, beyond just the body. To merge into the divine, we have to be able to have that sense of expansiveness. And then I have a really nice quote from Swamiji here. He says, kindness increases one's sense of oneness with others. It expands, rather than narrowing, one's sense of identity. If it is true that a lessening of ego consciousness leads to greater inner freedom, then kindness and generosity are paths to that freedom. In fact, Swamiji even said kindness could be considered a legacy of Ananda, of his at Ananda. And so, you know, kindness helps us expand beyond the ego. One thing I really like about this is Swamiji talked about the ego in a factual way, but the term ego is very much in society used in a popular term. It can be used as a put down. That person has a really strong ego. What a bad ego. What a big ego. You know, it can be used in a way that labels others and turns people off and skews the meaning that we should use the term ego about. It shouldn't be a sentence of, you are a bad person. Basically, it's equal to saying you're a bad person. And we don't want to get caught up in that, even though it may be true. Someone's ego could be really big. That could be a fact. But when we start using the term ego in that way, like I said, it skews what's going on for us. And really what we're trying to do is disidentify so much with ourselves that we are able to expand into the infinite. And that sounds very theoretical and everything, but think about it this way. The ego part of us is the one that's in fear all the time. It's the part of us that is contractive and says, I have to just protect what's mine. I have to just care about me and my things, and I don't have time to care about other people. And besides, what matters most are my opinions about things, and who cares what you think. That's the ego contracted into itself. And all those attitudes are examples, or I should say all those attitudes are consequences of and represent an ego that's contracted into itself, a person that is contracted into their self. So anyone who's contracted will have those attitudes. It's not specific to one person. Anyone can get in a contractive spot and feel all those things. And so we want to continually try and expand out of that contractive feeling. As Swamiji said in this quote, if we want to find true happiness and true inner freedom, we have to find ways to expand. And kindness can be a way to do it. And so that's why kindness really is a spiritual practice, because not only does it feel good, but it also feels good to others. But it also gives us this sense of expansion that is a very important part of our meditation practice. It's also an important part of karma, because when we are giving kindness, at some point kindness will come back to us. If the only way we can give kindness is the thought, well, if I give kindness, then I'll get it back. Okay, that's a start. But really, Swamiji said that there is this joy associated with being kind that doesn't have to depend on the response of the other person. It's like unconditional love, which is a divine quality. Kindness, I think, comes from this unconditional love, this divine quality of loving without expecting anything back. And so when we give kindness, we can feel a happiness and inner joy from the act of giving in that way. And Swamiji would say so many things about how to be kind. It was such a nice way to give another way of not saying, get out of your ego, get out of your small self. Quit being so afraid about everything. Instead, his way was to focus on the positive part of it, the expansive part of living. And, even in the Nayaswami order, he called this samadhi affirming behaviors. Behaviors that are not saying, not the ego, not this, not that, the spiritual path, I have no desires, I have no attachments, I have none of this, none of that. Well, when we get caught up in that, it's kind of an old way of looking at the path that makes us contractive. If we define ourselves by the things we're pushing away, I'm not supposed to have attachments. I'm not supposed to react. I'm not supposed to do this. I'm not supposed to do that. Well, we're not being kind to ourselves when we have those attitudes also. The not can be easily uh, voided out by the what can be done. So if we are acting expansive and kind, there's no room to be contractive. There's no room to say not this, not that, not that. If we are expansive in our meditations and we are able to expand to a point that our sense of self begins to expand into the infinite, then the attachments we have naturally fall away. Then the desires we have start to be fulfilled by the spine. The desires begin to be fulfilled through feeling bliss, through feeling divine qualities. And not only that, Kriya helps us burn up these desires, helps us burn up these vrittis. So when we go for the expansiveness of life, rather than the not this, not that, neti, then we're reaching beyond ourselves. We're trying to include the reality of others. You know, Swamiji, in my mind, first of all, he was probably the most advanced soul I ever encountered in my own life. He had such a high consciousness all the time. And, you know, for instance, if you were in his presence, you might collect 10 questions before you were about to see him. Like, oh, I got to ask him about this too, and I got to ask him about that. But when you were in his presence, you would suddenly forget all your questions because the answer to the questions was raise your energy and get in higher consciousness. And when you were in his presence, you would just feel that higher consciousness and realize, oh yes, I need to expand. I need to, rather than just focus on what's not working, I need to focus on what is working. Focus on the positive and the direction I want to move forward towards, rather than where I came from. Master said a really good quote about that. He said, the past, just forget about it. I wish I had the quote with me, but just forget about the past. And so we're living in the present moment. We're living to expand ourselves, and also think about how kindness is the way to do that. Swamiji was kind in so many ways. You know, he had this higher consciousness and really, I'm sure, the ability to see many people's issues. And yet his way was not to say, you need to work on this and you need to work on that and you should do this. On the other hand, he wasn't necessarily saying, oh, you're doing so wonderfully, you're doing so great, you're just such a fabulous person, and oh, you're higher consciousness too. He wasn't that way either. You would think, oh, if someone's really kind, they're going to say those things. We had one person say, you know, how am I doing? And, you know, what are you going to say? We're all trying our best. It's not for us to judge others and say, you're doing this and you should work on this and that. Really, that comes from inside. We're not here to do that. And Swamiji, he did not do that with others. But what he would do is he would work with them and with the consciousness where they were. And so rather than expose someone or humiliate someone or really tell them the truth, instead, he might just introduce one expansive thought into that person that could be a seed for that person to suddenly shift their perspective on many things. He could say just the right thing. And he always tried to get agreement from others, which created a lot of harmony around him. And so So he would work with others through agreement in many ways. Like, do you think that's a good idea? I think so too. And so let's do that. That's a good idea. And so he was always working to uplift people. He also wanted us all to realize our potential in being arm in arm with God and Guru in the creative aspects of our life. He would very often talk about all the music he had written and all the books he had written, and he would say, "This is how I did it. I held an idea up, and then the melody just came to me." And he would talk about how he would raise his energy and offer it up to the divine, and boom, the answer would come. He talked in detail about how these things flowed to him, because he was saying we can do it too. And so I remember there'd be a few grumblers, people who, I don't know if they felt competitive with Swamiji or jealous, or just unhappy in life in general, but they'd say, "Oh, he's bragging about all his accomplishments." And there was not an ego in Swamiji that allowed him to grab a hold of trying to say, "I did this." In fact, he would never say, "I did this." Really, he knew that Master was flowing through him. His whole goal was to just have Master flow through him and to be a pure channel of Master. And if you think about it, Ananda is quite a miracle. No organized person could just create something like that. No practical business smart person could create an organization based on inspiration, based on pulling people together through Kriya Yoga. It has to be someone who has the ability to contain all these realities of people and yet keep things going in the right direction. First of all, Master's doing it, but he also needs channels to flow through to keep that going. And we have that in Jyotishji and Deviji, who give tons of inspiration in their example and in how they do things and lead things and guide things. But we had Swamiji before that as the Dharmacharya and guiding things in that way. He created what we have here. And, Jyotishji and Deviji were hand in hand with him in the earliest days, and were trained to carry on this legacy that's there. So, Swamiji, let's see, I had another thought. Well, I wanted to describe Swamiji's life a little bit like this, because he was such an example of having compassion for others on such a deep level. Just being in his presence, you could feel healed in many ways. And that comes from compassion. So why not practice it also? Why not learn? Oh, I remember the point I wanted to make. He said one way to live your life is to not be afraid to express positive feelings first. Very often we can feel a little contracted when we're with others and feel afraid to say anything positive. We wait for a positive thing to be said first to us before we open up ourselves. And he did not live his life that way. In fact, when he came into a room, he was always standing in a way that his heart kind of entered the room first. He lived in his heart. He was truly in touch with all of his deep feelings about things. And he had no problems. He said, compliment someone. Don't be afraid to compliment someone. He said he would often compliment the colors people were wearing. Don't be afraid to look a stranger in the eye and smile first, rather than wait until they accept you and whether you smile. You find when you do these things, you feel good in yourself, no matter how the person responds. I remember when I first came back to India here in Chennai, I was in a store, and I was kind of in my usual American friendliness way to be. And I remember I just smiled at someone, and they looked at me and like they just were shocked and walked away as if they were insulted. To this day, I don't know what happened. I just had a smile on my face and, kind of nodded to them or something. But, some people aren't ready for that. Obviously. I think also in busy, crowded cities, most people aren't interested in that. But Swamiji, he would just walk wherever he went. He'd be looking at people and smiling at them and just offering kindness to people. For a few years, I was his secretary, one of his secretaries, who answered his correspondence. And what happened was someone would write, and we would write the initial response, trying to tune into Swamiji, how he might respond. And then with the letter mostly written, then he would look it over and then make corrections. And, he was so kind in his response in so many ways. No matter how strange or selfish a request or anything, he always responded trying to see the higher reality for that person and trying to tune into what did that person really need from him in this case. The other thing he did was, to those who were open to him, he would help energetically, probably mostly energetically, but also help even, on the physical plane. But you had to be open to him. Like I said, there were some grumblers at times, and they were closed. And yet you could see they really wanted love and attention or wanted things, but they decided something in their own minds. And it kept them closed from Swamiji, and they could not receive help. And yet, even the most closed person would be in a good mood around him very often, or at least a good mood for a moment without realizing, oh, I'm in a good mood. And we would joke about how if our parents came to Ananda village, suddenly the parents were in much better moods. And they didn't know why, because they were not interested in this path at all. But just being in the uplifted environment suddenly made them, just happier people in general. My mother once just proclaimed to me, and she didn't know much. She said, I believe Swami Kriyananda was a genius. And I thought, I agree. I have no idea what she read or what was going on there, but she said that. And so she had a good response to my being a part of Ananda, and still does. So, this season, we tend to emphasize the teachings of Christ, and one of the teachings is, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And it folds into karma and reincarnation, do things that you want to have done to you. But it also has this broader meaning of be expansive, live from an expansive place, and try and be kind in as many situations as you can. And be kind to yourself as well, of course, because very often unkindness just comes from an unkind feeling towards ourselves. As spiritual devotees, sometimes we tend to be critical of ourselves. Oh, my meditation isn't good enough. And, oh, I had a reaction the other day. And we have to be kind about those types of things too. Let it go. Let go of the past. And try and live the present more with this kind-heartedness. And really, if kindness is difficult to do where it's someone who's really wronged you, then practice where it's easy. Practice on the ones where it's easy. And then find yourself stretching in to practicing with people where it's not so easy. Swamiji would he would never turn his back on anyone. People would turn their back and leave Ananda, but he always left the door open. Even if people left in anger or left in with very much criticalness, the door is always left open for that person to go off, do what they need to do. And sometimes they realize, wait a minute, I had so much, I want to come back. And so there's no shame coming back. There's just, I just got off for some reason for a while, and now I'm back and I feel much better. Maybe they worked through some karma or that they couldn't work through, I guess, in this environment. And Swamiji never judged. He didn't say, how dare that person show their face here. There was a very wonderful woman we knew who was away from Ananda. How long was Brinde gone?
Probably 30 years.
Yeah, we knew a woman recently, although recently means pre-2012. She did leave her body from cancer a few years ago, wasn't it? Yeah. But she was away around the time we were going to come here to Chennai, 2013. Maybe she came to Ananda 2012, 2011. She had been a part of Ananda 30 years before that, and then left for 30 years. And when she came back, people celebrated her being back. It was really heartwarming. And she walked around and just cared about being a positive influence no matter what she did. She had a lot of kindness in her. I think life had kind of beaten her at different points, but she fought back and ended up having a very victorious life. And that's a wonderful thing we can all want. We want a victorious life. And how do we do that? Begin to think about the word expansion. Expansion in my meditation, expansion in the way I deal with people, expanding my reality to include the reality of others. It can't just be done in one place. If we are not practicing kindness and expansion in our life outside of meditation, then it's going to be very hard to do it in our meditation. And very often meditation will reflect what we're doing in our life. Where we do really restless things, meditation is really restless. And so we want to practice, and even Swamiji said, practicing the presence of God, feeling God's presence with us. But a step beyond that is allowing the love of God to radiate from us in this divine love towards others. Really think about it. Think about giving love without expecting anything in return. And feeling fulfillment from the act of giving. It's a nice challenge to think about. Again, it doesn't mean sugary sweet, oh, that person's so sweet, they're so kind. Not like that. It doesn't always come out that way. But on the deepest level, it is the kindest way. So, happy holiday seasons to you all. Christmas season. We have our Christ consciousness tree that you can't see right now, but we will expand the camera again so you can see it. We'll have it with us during the all-day meditation, and God bless you.